So I got a question the other day about how can I, the person asking this, navigate the world of fitness in a way that doesn't seem so darn confusing. And there's a quote, I think I made the quote up. I haven't heard it anywhere else. So I'll quote it here, as quoting myself. And that is, scarcity is the currency of a contrarian, or even that of someone who is novel in nature. So when you go into the fitness world, people like to try and differentiate themselves really hard, right? They're like, oh, I want to be such an extreme area of one, and you should only eat this kind of food, or only eat that kind of food, or only do this kind of exercise, or that kind of exercise. And the reason why, unfortunately, this is successful, in my opinion, and why it's done, is that it provides the perception of scarcity, and scarcity in terms of knowledge. That is, the person who has this bit of information is the only one who has this information. And if you want to acquire this rare information that clearly must be the most effective, then, well, you must follow that person and engage with that person and believe their ideas. Because obviously, this person is dealing with something that is so valuable that no one else even has thought of it, right? So that's the idea, in my opinion, that why a lot of people position themselves in extremes. If you're extreme, it is probably a stance that not many people take, and because not many people take that stance, it provides the perception of scarcity, right? Or novelness. It's something very different, and different is like, well, if it is different, what is the reason behind that? And human nature or assumption typically is that that person who is quote unquote different is perceived as an expert by others in the field, or even by other consumers in the field. Then that expert's different bit of information is only associated with their knowledge, and only they have that knowledge. So it sets up this kind of bizarre authoritative structure, where the perception of, knowledge and that person has is scarce, and so therefore what they have is extremely valuable and must be the end-all be-all. Now, the irony of that is the sheer volume of extreme polarizing ideas in the fitness and strength and conditioning world that exist probably lets you know that they are not all correct. Not all polarizing extreme ideas, especially dichotomous ones that are two exact opposites, can be both absolutely correct and absolutely the way to go. Someone is wrong in this absolute nature, and if we can assume that someone is wrong when it comes to being absolute, that it's no longer saying that because they're novel and different, they are absolutely correct, but there's lots of novelness and lots of absoluteness, and they all kind of tend to be at least polarizing or different. I mean, not polarizing, but at least opposite ends of the spectrum. Then the odds become, well, they both are probably incorrect, right? Because they both have deemed or claimed they have success, or have even shown success, and let's say both have been factually successful with their methods, well, then clearly they're not the only methods that someone can do, right? It doesn't make any sense. Now, what happens here is, this is my opinion, is that it is what I call round-up facts. That is, it is probably some things are right. There are some beneficial aspects to it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have continued success with who they work with. Totally fair. But not all of it is correct. But the adamancy of all of it being correct creates, say, maybe 60% of what they're doing is very good, and maybe 40% is make-believe. Who knows? I don't know. But if you round up from that 60%, well, it's a round-up fact. It is above the threshold of 50%, and so you round up and you can make it pretend to be 100% correct. So what happens is you get all these different kind of feels and extreme beliefs. But what the end of the day is, if you're someone navigating the world like that, and whether it is the fitness world, nutrition, whatever it might be, just take that with a little bit of understanding that odds are no one probably has the ultimate solution. I know I sure don't. We can look at science, and science by nature is very vulnerable. It is not necessarily the process of being right and absolutely correct. It's the process of being less wrong. It starts with, right, the idea of I'm I am wrong, so I'm trying to find out what could be more right, but not absolutely correct. And so that's something to think about when you go forward and diving into the fitness world. And that is that just because it's novel and different doesn't mean that it's going to be backed by some scarce resource of knowledge that individual has acquired. All of my knowledge is knowledge that you can probably go and read yourself. My accumulation of information did not come from some bizarre, endeavor that I have uncovered and unmasked some universal truths to performance that only I have had access to. No, the things I've read are just in scientific research papers, and you can buy the books I have in my library shelves. And the formation of my opinions is unique because it comes from how I perceive and interpret those bits of information to formulate an educated philosophy behind what I do. But it is not somehow this uniquely scarce source that I extracted this information from outside of the willingness to actually just read some of these papers. So that's something to think about, and maybe that is a concept that can hold true in different fields than not just strength and conditioning and fitness, but the idea that when we engage with something and something seems too good to be true, sometimes that might be the case, but sometimes there might be a lot of benefits to it as well. And that is another important takeaway as I wrap this up here, is that you can learn from those novel areas, because if there is a level of novelness to it or scarcity to it or perceived expertise in that area, and they are yielding some beneficial results, it is my duty to try and understand, well, what aspects are they doing that is very effective? What can I take away from that information to learn for myself as a consumer of science and knowledge, and one trying to be better than yesterday? So it is not to say to ignore them, and it's not to say that don't engage with them, but it's to tread waters lightly, as you should tread the waters lightly as you listen to me. You should not assume that I am 100% correct. I always give this one bit of advice to my interns when I had them, and that is always never believe me, but always prove me wrong. That way you can formulate your own opinion as to my opinion. Example would be, I believe that you should do this many sets and this many reps and this exercise, and that's my belief, and I have an educated reason as to why I believe that. But I would love for you to disprove me and say, you know what, Max, I'm going to find out that that's incorrect. But maybe you find out it's kind of correct, but you as a person have interpreted the information, the same information that I read, differently. And so you've synthesized a new bit of knowledge that you can relate to yourself and say, well, Max, I agree with you to an extent, but I think these areas are missing in your philosophy, or these areas were overlooked, or I would like to add these areas to mine, so on and so forth. And that way you formulate an educated opinion that you can then stand against my educated opinion, and we can both have a mutual discussion through which hopefully we learn bits of information from each other and better formulate each other's opinions at the end of the day. So just something to think about, a little bit of a philosophical kind of discussion, and something that I like to think about when I read information. I listen to people and I try and do my best to expose myself to the widest variety of information I can, and that way I can help myself learn. But at the same time, just because I am diving into this information doesn't mean I'm going to hold it as an absolute truth, as much as I'm approaching it with a logical framework and a mindset that's going to help me get information out of it without being caught up in some of the things that might hold me back from, say, diving into other areas that might be opposed to this area that I'm listening to in the first place. So hopefully that helps. I appreciate you guys listening, and if you guys enjoyed, let me know, and take care.